Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Off Script with Pastor Jared.
And Aaron, the intern.
We are back for another episode. Glad to do it. And today's topic is one that is from my vault and creation. So this is not a user-submitted one, but it might cover a lot of different things. By the way, Aaron, we got a lot of positive feedback on the mailbag episode.
Good.
How do you feel about that?
I was stressed going into it, but I enjoyed it.
Because I didn't tell you. So we're going to recapture a little of that magic today in that we didn't tell each other what we're going to bring to the table today. But I want to set up the conversation with a biblical theme called the Shibboleth. And it's a weird word if you don't know what it is. I'm going to explain that, give the quick Bible story behind it, and then do some modern day versions of this ancient theme. So the word Shibboleth has been around a very long time. It came into being in the book of Judges in the Old Testament. So I'm going to read you the verses, and once I'm done, I'll give you just to make sure everybody understands what this is about. Then we'll jump right into it. So this is from Judges 12, 4 through 6. You can go read the story on your own if you like, but it's when the tribes were warring with one another. Not a good time in Israel. In the book of Judges, obviously, there's very few good times, but the tribes are at war with one another. And so they're talking about that happening. And then a certain way of distinguishing who was from what tribe came up. Here it is. Verse 5, and the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, let me go over, the men of Gilead said to him, are you an Ephraimite? And when he said, no, they said to him, then say Shibboleth. And he said, Shibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. Okay, kind of a weird little story, right?
Yeah, it's a good one.
So this is telling of a time when the tribes were warring with one another, and if you all look, I'll just be brief. If you all look the same, it's not like, you're from a different nation and you might have a different shaped nose, or your skin color might be a little different, or your hair might be different or something. Right. When you're all the same people, like Israelites, and you're warring with one another intertribally, it can be hard to know who's who. Right. So there's this kind of border at this river junction kind of comes up, and guys are coming and going across this one spot that becomes sort of a pinch point in the battle. And to determine who's who as they're coming across, they're asked to say this very weird, specific word, say Shibboleth. And so apparently the language there was a dialect difference in that one had a hard time recreating the sound of the sh. So the Shibboleth, if you could say Shibboleth, you were cool. You were in the in crowd. You were a part of our team. Okay, come on through. Open the gate, boys. But if you couldn't say it, and if you said Shibboleth, right, then you were on the out crowd. You were a part of the enemy crew. No good. Kill him right now.
Yeah, and we talked about this. So I'm taking Hebrew right now. At Mid-America.
Oh, bless your soul.
I'm loving it, actually.
Are you serious?
Dr. Kilpatrick, shout out. He's an amazing professor.
I loved my professor, but Hebrew for me was just like, I got to get through this. Okay.
But we talked about last semester a little bit about this story with Sibboleth and Shibboleth. And like, if you know the Hebrew alphabet,
and I do.
I don't know much, but this I do know. So there's a scene and a sheen, and it'd be kind of like if in English we had two different S's, and one made a sh sound, and another one made a s sound. So depending on where you were from, whether you were, like you said, on their team or the other team, perhaps your language used the scene more often than the sheen. So most likely they would write out the word. And they would have asked people, like, what does it say? And if their natural inclination was to say Shibboleth, then they know these guys are from a different territory than we are. So
I guess you could really spice things up and say Sally sells seashells by the seashore.
Yeah, you get them to say that instead. Yeah.
But okay, so the whole point of this though was it created an easily definable division point where you're either going to go one way or the other. You say this, you're on this team.
Right.
You say this, you're on this team. And it made an easily identifiable tribal split.
Right.
And so that got me to thinking about just the last few years, really is how I started thinking about this, and how it seems like maybe I'm just, on the younger side, but it seems like in just a few short years of my being a pastor, there have been an inordinate amount of Shibboleth moments, or moments where you have to make a decision, and you're either going to go to the left or to the right. Mm-hmm. You're going to split one way or another, and you have to make a call, and it's here and it's now. It's kind of like those guys at the gate. They show up at the river or the gate or whatever it was, and it was like, hey, say the word. And it's like, whatever I say is going to put me in one camp, right? One over the other. And so I've noticed that's happened an awful lot in the last few years. And, I think there's positives and negatives to it, because you can – it's been a time of testing, and it's been a time of purification, I think, in the last few years, where – we now know where people are on certain issues. Yeah. So the part that Aaron doesn't know what I'm going to say, and I don't know what he's going to say, is I just gave him this general thought of the Shibboleth and said, you tell me some that came to your mind.
Right.
And then I'll tell you some that came to my mind. We'll compare and contrast, and then we'll both give maybe what we think is the next one coming. Mm-hmm. All right. So I think you said you went old school.
Yeah, I went a little more old school.
Okay, I want to hear yours first, so we'll go chronological order. Cool. Tell me what you got and why.
So the two main ones that came to my mind, just thinking throughout church history, where there's a clear split on whether you're on this side or that side. I remember studying history in high school. I'm talking about the Byzantine Empire, and they had these things called icons at one point. Especially in the 8th and 9th century. And what icons were was they were kind of like what we talked about The Chosen the other week. Like what icons were was it was like, painted or drawn images of Jesus and of Mary and of other highly regarded saints in the church. And what the issue is that people were so adamant that we should not be drawing these people, that like this is a clear breaking of the second commandment, not to make idols, that we are drawing them when we don't know what they really looked like, that there is actually a ban in the Byzantine Empire for a number of decades, starting with Leo III and Constantine V. Just to throw some names out there if you want to study this.
I thought Leo was one of the Ninja Turtles. Man, I need to get into history.
Yeah, he was also in church history too. They had some turtles back then. But the ban lasted for about 40 or 60 years, depending on who you ask. And like they would put people to death and persecute people for like drawing a picture of Jesus or drawing a picture of Mary. And then for a little while it was reopened. And then again in the 9th century for about 30 years, they made it illegal again to have icons or pictures of any famous saint. Like these people were destroying churches, destroying famous art, because they were so adamant that there should not be a picture of any of the saints or of Jesus.
Well, it makes me feel a little better about our Chosen debate. Yeah. We're not the first ones to ever deal with that.
Right. But there were people on both sides of it. So it wasn't until Empress Theodora in 843, after her husband passed away, and her husband was big on it. After her husband passed away, she kind of nixed the whole controversy and was like, look, we are not going to be creating such a division over this, and made it legal again. But you could see a clear, some people were adamant like this is okay, and they lost their lives for it. Some people were very obviously adamant that it was not okay. So you saw that division there. And then another church history one I thought of was just the Baptist tradition, going back to the Anabaptist. You see that we haven't really talked about this yet, but we've tossed around the idea of talking about different denominations, and kind of a big distinction of the Baptist denomination, going back to the Anabaptists, has always been a stance against infant baptism. And kind of talking to my seminary friends who know a lot, probably way too much church history, There's a lot of guys. If you just want to look up these guys, Felix Manz was tied to a pole and drowned in a lake for being a Baptist and not for wanting to stand against the church and kind of make the clear distinction. No, I believe in believers' baptism and not infant baptism.
I mean, today we would just say, like, we can disagree about this.
Yeah, but I'm not going to drown you.
I'm not going to drown you in a lake.
Yeah, so they'd actually call it the third baptism.
Oh, wow.
So they would take them and they would drown them again.
Too far.
And then Dirk Willems was another big guy. He's a Dutch Anabaptist who escaped from prison, which he was put in prison for being a Baptist. He escaped from prison, and the guy who is chasing him across this frozen lake falls into the lake. So Dirk turns around and he saves the guy from the lake. After he saved him, he was recaptured and put to death. So you see this clear distinction where people were willing to stand like, this is where I stand, whether it means losing my life or not. This is where I stand. This is what I see in God's word, and this is what I'm going to hold to. So those were two big distinctions that came into my mind just from the little church history that I've studied and heard people talk about. Wow. Those are the two big ones that I thought of.
It's very interesting to me that those are the two that you chose. So my mind went to probably things that I've had to lead through in the last couple of years. You know, I'm not a super long tenured ministry guy, but in the last 10 years, I've seen, I mean, the world has gone through maybe more changes in the last 10 than it has in some of the, centuries before. There's just a lot going on. So I just thought of some things that have been different since, I started, we planted the church in Colorado in 2015. So I've been you could say full-time since 15. So maybe add some intern years before that I've been conscious of these kind of things. So maybe 10 years that I've been aware of what's going on in the ministry world. The first one, obviously, what has been the sexual revolution for me of leading through this. 2015 was the Obergefell decision, and having to basically you had to decide at that point if the law changes. See, because and when I say law, I'm doing air quotes because it was a court case, but I'm using the vernacular, what people say. When the law changes or a court case is passed that goes against what we have been teaching or the Bible says, do we go with the law or do we not? Do we say we don't believe that? So, and it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to lead through it. Mm-hmm. So that was the first time it was like, hey, gay marriage is legal now, and pretty much most states are doing it. So what do you say, Pastor? Yes or no? Are you going to go with the law or not?
Right, and you would hope that churches who air quotes churches who say that they follow God's word and that they're disciples of Christ, you'd hope that they would very boldly stand on Scripture. But I think even driving down the streets of Memphis, I see so many churches that have LGBTQ flags hanging outside of the churches. There's a campus ministry at the University of Memphis that I sent you a picture of a couple months ago that had that pride flag hanging from their door. Mm-hmm. I'm like you are very clearly, saying Shibboleth instead of Shibboleth. Like, you're very adamantly saying we're not just gonna be silent on this. We're not gonna, we're obviously not gonna say that we think homosexuality is a sin according to these churches, but we're not even gonna be silent. Like, we're gonna very adamantly say Shibboleth, the opposite.
They want you to know what camp they're in. Mm-hmm. And obviously that wasn't a hard decision for me. My mind was made up. I was going to stand on biblical truth beforehand, right? But still, it's a thing that has been in our face constantly of you're going to go this way or you're going to go this way. And you have to choose. Holding some middle ground really is it's not going to happen. You can't hold a middle ground on this.
No.
And so an example of, I would even say that has morphed into a new middle ground shibboleth of, so the people that have tried to form the middle ground in this are now having another shibboleth in their face, which is, can you have homosexual thoughts and temptations as long as you don't act upon it? So that's the first one was gay marriage, yay or nay. That was the big one. And then that's people kind of got into their corners. But then amongst the people who were in the no category, a new division formed of, okay, well, if it's wrong to be in a homosexual relationship, what if you just have the thoughts and you don't act on them? And that's been sort of the new division Shibboleth point. And my position on that, I've been standing on for the last several years since this has been, the argument of the gay Christian has come into the vernacular.
Right.
My argument on that has been even the temptation in homosexual mindset is wrong. You can't even have you can't claim an orientation. You can't claim that even if I don't act upon it, it's that's all that matters is I don't act upon it.
Yeah.
So because there's no good way to turn that towards something good. It's fundamentally broken in its very core in nature. Maybe that's its own podcast episode.
Yeah, I could digress on that pretty far. So
yeah, so that's I feel like another one because now there's been these discussions of as long as you don't act on it, camp, and then no, it's still wrong to have the temptation that's oriented toward homosexuality.
And I think just like touching on it quickly, maybe we should do another episode on it. I would say that there are Christians who can have the temptation, but we're told, as in Scripture, that we should flee temptation, and that temptation is not from the Lord. So as long as they recognize that, like if a Christian was saying, like, I'm a homosexual, but I'm just choosing not to act on it outwardly, but I still have those temptations, but they don't seem concerned to flee from those temptations, and they're calling themselves a homosexual, then I think that's an issue.
And obviously it's more than just to separate the body and the mind is not. I mean, Jesus didn't allow that when he said, if you hate in your heart, it's murder. If you had lust in your heart, it's still adultery.
Right.
So he
could say the same for the plenty of men within the church who struggle with pornography or sexual lust, and
But I would even say it's still. And this is why the episode might be good. Is that there's still something different about homosexual lust and heterosexual lust. One can be. You can put a saddle on one and make it into something good eventually.
Okay. Yeah, in marriage.
It's wrong, but in the right direction.
Right.
It can be. Yeah, you point the arrow toward marriage,
right.
or you point the arrow and say, "Hey, you're." There's a way to get this in the right direction.
But there's no way
for homosexuality to have that temptation controlled or brought under the dominion of Christ or fixed. It's just wrong in whole.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
So anyway, that was another one. Now this the 2020 year brought more shibboleths than I ever was ready for.
Yeah.
I was leading through that in San Antonio, but and I feel fairly proud of the way things were handled, but man, was it challenging, and man, did it take a lot out.
Sure.
So COVID lockdowns, vaccines, masks, guilting your congregation to do any of those things. That was a massive shibboleth. How long will you shut down your church for? So I feel like all of those things kind of went together. You were either on the side of really wanting to let people make their own decisions and act accordingly, or we need to push for you to do these things, and even so far as using maybe your spiritual authority as a pastor to pressure people to do things, which I think now as we look back, we've seen that really has backfired badly.
Yeah.
Especially now, there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy and guilt now after the fact, as people are seeing. Maybe it has nothing to do, but I'm just saying what everybody's thinking. There's a lot of people, young people and athletes that seem to be having heart attacks and dying and having trouble. So the world is kind of looking at that like, I wonder if that's connected to the vaccine. We don't know if it is or not. It seems strange to me. And so if I as a pastor 2 years ago had stood up in the pulpit and said what many did, which saying things like, God wants you to love other people by getting this vaccine, love your neighbor, get vaccinated, and then it turned later to be what it is now, I would be living with some degree of guilt for that.
Right.
So at the time, we did shut down, like most churches in San Antonio for a time, but it was a short time. Mm-hmm. Once it felt like there's not really going to be an end in sight for this, we need to go ahead and get back together and meet. So we did. Our church grew because of that decision. Masks at our church were always voluntary. We made a decision early on. We're not going to kick anybody out if they don't wear a mask. I never felt comfortable doing that. We never took a stance on the vaccine as far as pro or con. We left it to the individual. I did write a couple of exemption letters for people if they asked me to. And then there was no guilt or pressure from me applied in like my spiritual role as pastor. If people asked me personally, I'd give my opinions, but there was nothing because that was happening hot at the time. Right. I mean, it was what everybody was talking about. And I just think you have to be very careful as a pastor not to use your authority in the wrong ways. Yeah. So for me, that was a Shibboleth moment. Yeah. I know Andy Stanley came out and said before, we hadn't even been in this thing, a month, and we're shutting down till 2021. It was just like, whoa, man, that's a long time. Like, you don't even know what's going to happen in 3 months from now. Like, almost eager to shut the church down. And there were some churches in Memphis that are shut down this year.
I know that some churches that are still shut down.
Still, and it's like, at what point? What are you doing? You know, you're not a church anymore at that point. So that was a massive, which way are you going to go? Mm-hmm. Are you going to go with what the kind of the narrative is? Or are you going to lead these people and let people make their own decisions? So that was hard, man. Mm-hmm. That was, I know pastors that are listening know this. I'm sure business owners had to go through it on some degree too. It was just a rough couple of years.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I remember that same year there was a challenge that summer when George Floyd had died, and was the Black Lives Matter the summer of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, that it just took over, and that it was kind of like, there was a lot of pressure of, are you going to speak to this? Are you going to say the phrase? Literally, talk about Shibboleth. Yeah. There was a thing of, will you say the phrase Black Lives Matter? Yeah. Will you post the black square for your profile picture? Will you to cover to say that I'm not speaking as a white man? It got pretty weird there for a time period, and then the riots came through and really took over many American cities for a time. It was pretty wild times. And so I just remember as a pastor, what are you going to do with BLM came into my, I had to do something with it. Right. And so I remember looking them up, and I went on their website when it was like early, before they had really taken off in a huge way. I got wind of them, and I went to their website and their About Us page, and you will think people don't believe me, but you need to go find the original About Me page that they had before they scrubbed it. I remember this. It was essentially a document describing a communist view of America, what they intended to do. Did you ever see the original About Me page? No. Other than the word comrade that appeared several times, there was discussion in there about dismantling the nuclear family and things regarding like trans spaces that we need to provide for. And it's like, what does that have to do?
What does that have to do with?
I go in trying to read about police brutality or something, right? And I go in there and there's discussion about queer spaces and queer childcare spaces for trans mothers. Goodness. and like it just but on top of the whole thing it was clearly a coming from a Marxist perspective. Not long after that, the founders came out, or videos were unearthed from the founders that came out and said that they were trained Marxists. They said those words themselves. And then not long after that came out that very little of the money donated went to anything relating to black causes or
it padded their pockets instead,
and mostly went to large mansions that the founders bought for themselves. So I felt vindicated in that. And I always told people when they were like, will you say Black Lives Matter? I'm like, of course I will say the phrase if you mean the phrase is what it's true.
Do I believe that human life matters?
Of course. I mean, I'll even say, Black Lives Matter. I will say the phrase, but I don't want that phrase to be attached to that movement in any way because these are different things for me. I can affirm the value of black people's lives,
and I think,
but I don't want that group attached to my name.
Yeah, and I think that was a big struggle for especially younger people my age who are still trying to discover what they think and what they believe about the world, was seeing Black Lives Matter. Of course, I agree with that statement, but kind of being attacked if you don't support the organization. And because there was a lot of, and I was even at Memphis at the time, and there's a lot of people that I knew on social media and people who were super passionate about this. I will not be your friend. I will not talk to you. I won't acknowledge your existence unless you say this and you stand with it.
If not,
Right.
I mean, it got ugly, and it was really one of the shibboleths of our time. Will you say the phrase? And I'm proud that I did not. I would like to think that there are other different ways to be involved, but ultimately it seemed like a big virtue signal to me to say, to appear that you're doing something, to say the phrase, post the profile pic, and give the appearance that you're a virtuous person. But what does it matter if that organization does absolutely nothing? I mean, they've accomplished nothing. And I think they've actually brought a lot of destruction. And I would actually even further argue that the discussion on race has gone backwards over the last few years. It's not gotten better. It's gotten more hostile than it was. And I think that there are people that live in this industry whose goal it is to stir anger and discord to keep their jobs necessary. It's kind of like, there was a lot of concern for many years in the pro-life movement that you want abortions to get low but not gone, because if they're gone, you have no job. So
I've heard people say that.
So it's the same kind of thing with this is if racism really goes away, a lot of people with fat paychecks lose their job.
Right.
So you want to keep some of it alive. Anyway, I don't think that's conspiracy, but it seems like a picture of what's happening. So anyway, that was a huge one. I know we lived through it. Another one that came to my mind was this past summer when Roe v. Wade was overturned. The leak actually came out first. If you remember, there was kind of a leak that came out from the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And that sort of let the air out of the balloon. And then when it actually was overturned, it happened twice. So it was 2 times in the summer. And I remember the shibboleth of the time was, there was sort of obviously the two, are you happy about it? Are you not happy about it? So you kind of would come out and you would notice if people would say, I'm celebrating today because of the Roe v. Wade case, or what a sad day for America, or women have lost their reproductive freedom. So that was a clear split of one way or another. But kind of like I mentioned earlier, the shibboleth within a shibboleth, within the world that tries to appear pro-life, there was even a smaller shibboleth of how hard are you celebrating? I don't know if you remember this, but it was like there were those that came out and was like, and this is a win today because lives are going to be saved. Right. The end. And then there's the other side that was like, yeah, but there's a lot of scared women right now, and you had to tip your hat somehow to be like, yeah, this is good, but you can't celebrate because there's a lot of scared
I remember seeing that.
Females out there because now they they can't get an abortion anymore. So
yeah, I remember Christianity Today, I think, had a big article on that was shared around a lot of Christian circles. But just talking about how yes, and whether they're correct or not, I mean, that's again another discussion for another day, but they're just really focused on yes, this is a victory for human lives, that abortion that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who live in brokenness and also need to be shown mercy.
Yeah, I felt like hidden in some of that was a little bit of dismay that Roe v. Wade actually was overturned.
Yeah.
And
it's Christianity Today, so.
Yeah, right. And I mean, like, no, I'm going to celebrate. Like, this is good. This is a net good.
Yeah, I think
it's not even close.
Both, and that you can celebrate and also help those who need help. So.
Right, but like sometimes what they meant was by help was people that still want to have an abortion.
Yeah, give them abortions.
And it's like, no, you can't anymore. Sorry, right. and I don't feel bad, and I don't have to feel bad.
I agree.
100%. So that was, you needed to celebrate, but not too hard. Well, that was sort of the weird moment of within.
Yeah, I remember that.
The Inception Shibboleth.
And it was interesting to see even like comparing the two big events that we just mentioned, the Black Lives Matter summer and then the Roe v. Wade. There were a lot of churches that were very outspoken about Black Lives Matter, and then Roe v. Wade is overturned and you don't hear a lick of anything.
Right.
And it kind of makes you think,
and
like,
probably true in the reverse as well. I mean, you pick the battles that you want to fight most of the time.
Yeah, I even have friends who have told me, like, I was okay with my church standing with BLM, and maybe I didn't really see the issue then, but then when Roe v. Wade was overturned, it was like a sad thing. Mm-hmm. They're like, that's what really exposed to me that there's something weird going on here.
Right.
So I think that's the case for a lot of Christians.
Mm-hmm. One that happened recently, I wrote it on my list, that this is not nearly as heavy, but you remember this year Christmas Day was a Sunday, and whether or not you were going to cancel service or have service, it became a shibboleth, didn't it?
Yeah.
It became of what are you going to do? Are you going to call it and say, go? We want everybody to stay at home and enjoy the Christmas morning opening presents with your family. We as a church are going to bow or step aside and not make you make a decision. We want to do that for you. Take that off your plate. We're just going to cancel so we all can enjoy family time.
Right.
Or we're going to, what we did at Kirby Woods, which is we're going to have a service.
I was very proud of us for that.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Because it's Sunday, and my argument for that time was I'm not commanded by Scripture to meet with God's people, gather and worship on Christmas Day or December 25th. I am commanded to meet and gather and worship on Sundays.
Right.
So for me, it was kind of a funny backwards thing to put cultural Christmas Day above real Christian worship day.
Right.
And almost, as we're gathered at Kirby on Christmas Day, I'm just thinking, like, this was such a right call to make. Like to have it on this day, to sing Christmas carols. We sang from the hymns, Christmas hymns that day, to have a message about just the supremacy of Christ in Christmas. It was just like, man, how much we would have missed out just not doing this at all.
Yeah, it was mine and Zoe's first Christmas together, and I don't think I would have wanted to spend it any other way than gathered with the church family. And maybe I was more disappointed than I should have been, but I was so disappointed in a lot of churches.
This is how you know it's a shibboleth, because
for whatever reason,
I bet you went and checked on some churches.
Did. No, I did. I was looking on their websites. I was looking at, and maybe this is different for me than like COVID and BLM, because I wasn't really, I wasn't going into ministry at those times, and it's only been like since 2021 that I've been wanting to go into pastoral ministry. So like the Roe v. Wade was big for me, but especially the Christmas Day thing this year, I don't know why that just hit me so hard. That's how so many churches that even churches that I highly respect, and if someone told me they went there, I'd be like, man, that's awesome. That's a great church. Even them just calling off services on Christmas Day, I was like,
you kind of missing it.
Man, I don't know. This just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you're missing it. You're. We say every year that it's Jesus is the reason for the season.
Right.
And we say things like, maybe if you want to do the presents and the tree and the Santa Claus and the Rudolph and all that, that's cool, but just don't get it mixed in. Don't get confused. And don't try to think that that's real Christmas. And we say that, but then this was the opportunity.
They actually come head to head.
The time to show it came, and it was like, here it is. And then for me to cancel your worship service so people could open presents at home was the ultimate confusion of that. Now you've sent a message to your people and to the kids of your church that when Christianity and culture collide, you go with culture. And I just think, man, that was an opportunity to teach.
It's not even like we were saying, like when we gathered together as a church on Christmas morning, we didn't say, now, when you go home, make sure you don't open any presents. No. Like you could have just said, hey, we're going to still do our normal Christmas thing, but we're going to go to church as a family together first. And then we're going to come home and just go about a normal Christmas day. And we weren't putting a ban on, cultural Christmas. We were just saying,
don't get it confused.
Gather and then do it. Yeah.
And then even the next week, there was actually a lot of churches that canceled for New Year's Day. I don't know if you saw that too. Some did 2 in a row. Now, some canceled, to be fair, there was some that canceled because of weather
there were a couple of churches that I was like, man, they canceled.
Like Germantown was going to meet, but they canceled because of water pipes. I mean, if you're listening to this years into the future, it was a weird freeze weekend. Like pipes froze, electricity was
so that's more
blackouts.
Understandable. But
still. I'm not talking about that, but there were those that made that plan in advance.
Right.
And then again on New Year's, call it Sabbath Sunday or something. I don't get that. Any time in the Bible a Sabbath is taken, you Sabbath from work, not from worship. I've never seen in the Bible where you take a Sabbath from worship. You take a Sabbath from work. So,
right.
I really don't understand that. If your church is that complicated to put on that it's work, maybe you need to simplify your service, or, maybe that's just a great day to show the simplicity of what church could be. One guy on an acoustic guitar or a piano. Good. And then a guy that preaches, read your announcements, go home. It's fine. You don't have to do the big show. Anyway, that's maybe another episode too.
That's good.
And then, so let's talk now about the future of what you think the next Shibboleth is going to be. You've got yours. You have one or two?
I have a couple, but I can just pick some.
Yeah, give me what you think they are. What you think, and give me a time frame, and then like urgent, happening now, or like 5 years from now. Give me what you got.
I'll just quickly go through these. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these unless there's one that piques your interest.
Okay.
So the first one that I said was one that we've already mentioned. I think to an even further extent, the issue with governmental pressures on churches to either be silent or to cave to what they say in regard to sexual ethics will definitely increase in the future.
Yeah. Well, we've already seen the pronouns are becoming a shibboleth in themselves. Will you call this male she, or will you call this individual they? That's coming, or it's here.
And will you make a clear distinction between male and female, even within the government of your church?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then also going along with COVID, kind of division over whether meeting together for church in person really matters. Or can we just put on a service and people watch it and we don't have to gather to make it easier on everyone else?
And if that's true, if you go down that dark hole, why have multiple churches? Why not just find the church?
Yeah, just have one person.
Who's the best preacher in America and who's the best band in America? Film them and just send it to everybody.
Yeah, ridiculous. And then I think division over worship music, it's always been a division within church history. Even the hymn writers like Isaac Watts, like he faced major backlash for writing his classic hymns. A lot of solid contemporary churches today, not the crazy ones that we don't do anymore, but the solid ones who are putting out contemporary style worship today still face backlash. And it's just going to be interesting to see as music genres change, like you think what was popular in the 50s versus what's popular now. In the next 70 years, what's going to be like the popular style of music? It's not going to be rock or pop. Like, what's it going to be? And how will the church respond to that?
Like what the contemporary, because by definition, contemporary changes.
Contemporary is whatever is modern. So,
if contemporary is, if in your mind you're thinking like Hillsong as contemporary, well, you're already behind because that was contemporary 10 years ago.
Right. And 30 years, that's going to be.
But like, who's popular now? Billie Eilish or whatever the top. I mean, go look at the top 5 groups right now. That's contemporary.
Yeah.
Is our church music going to sound like that?
Yeah. And so it's going to be interesting to see.
And by you mean no.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's a good question. No, they're not going to want to. Yeah. But like, it's just going to be interesting. Like, maybe techno music is the next popular. I don't know.
Right.
Like, so like, are we going to have techno Christian music? Like, who knows?
Jazz Christian?
Yeah. Hey, I'm good with some
bluegrass.
Jazz. Yeah. I like bluegrass.
Do it.
And then one that I even think of as someone going into pastoral ministry, and what am I going to have to deal with 20 years down the road? I think of a lot of people who detransition, who used to be transgender, or who even now, people my age who think, or people younger than me, even like, young kids who think, well, I don't want to be this gender, I want to be that gender. And they go through surgeries, they go through hormone blockers, all these terrible things that we don't know what it's going to impact them in 20 years.
They followed the advice. They listened to the professionals.
If they, if God saves them and they convert to Christianity and they want to come join my church 20 years from now, how do I deal with that? How do I deal with someone who's transgender from their past where they made mistakes and they want to join my church now? Mm-hmm. Maybe they're called into ministry and they want to use their testimony to lead in the church and to impact the next generation. How do you
sing on the stage?
Go through that?
I mean, you've got a whole host of issues there because, if you do something in your past that you don't, and God saves you, typically it doesn't bear a permanent mark on your body that shows it's obvious to everybody.
Right.
But this will. If you've gone down this road, this transition road as a high schooler, for example, and you blocked your puberty and you've even got surgery. I mean, we're hearing about girls who got double mastectomies and they're getting all kinds of surgeries and they're having to wear bandages everywhere. And so 5 years down the road, they realize they've made a horrible, terrible mistake, but they kind of now look like a hybrid between a man and a woman.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson just had a podcast episode where he interviewed someone who is detransitioned.
Because you can't get puberty back. If you stop it, you're always going to be sort of locked in that position, that hybrid position, and you've put your body through a lot.
Yeah.
Certain parts of it you get different. Your bones do different things as a man and a woman. So, what are you going to do, young pastor, when the post-transition or regrettable transition person comes back? And I would hope, I've said this before, that our mindset will be more like the prodigal son's dad of all that matters is that you come home.
Right.
Come home. We'll sort it out when you get here.
Yeah.
But we're going to rejoice that you come back and not, hopefully not wag the finger and say, I told you so. That'll be tempting, won't it? To say, hey, we tried to warn you because we have. I've been talking about it as a pastor through the whole time. But I just pray that God reminds me of anybody can be in that situation. Everybody sins. Not every sin bears a permanent feature on your body that is observable, but this one does. So I think you're right on the money that this is going to be a huge one in the future of how churches respond to people who have gone through transition and regret it and want to come back. And I would love that. I think it's this is a very biblical thing that the same churches who preach against transsexual and transitioning, which we are one.
Right.
I've preached against it, should also be the same churches to receive people back after they've gone down that road of sin.
It reminds me of 1 Corinthians 6 when Paul's talking to the believers there, and he's talking about the idolaters and the adultery, people caught in adultery, and all these like major sins. And he's telling them not to judge them because he says, "Such were some of you, but you were washed." You were sanctified and you were justified in the name of Jesus.
And that truly will be something the church has not had to deal with before. We're living through something unique in that situation.
Yeah. And then if I had just two really quick ones left, would be, I think there's going to be a division among churches, if there isn't already, away from church discipline, just analyzing my generation and Generation Alpha after me. There's a lot of parents who teach their kids, hey, I can't tell you what's right and wrong. I'm not going to correct you because you're your own person. You're making your own decisions. You want to be this, then you can be that. You want to do this, then you can do that. I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to discipline you for what you're doing. I'm going to let you be your own person. So the kid grows up, and whatever you want to do is good. Like, you do you. So the kid grows up thinking, and the school systems are teaching them that whatever I want is what I get. Anyone who disagrees with me is in the wrong. So then, let's say they get saved, and they've been told their whole life, though, that I'm usually right, and everyone else is usually wrong. So if they're caught in sin, if they're not pursuing personal holiness, and the church wants to discipline or discipleship them, it's going to be hard for them to come to grips with, whoa, wait, you're telling me that, like, you're going to discipline me? You're going to do something to tell me that I'm wrong? Mm-hmm. And that's going to be, I think that's going to be a hard thing for the next generation to wrestle with.
Yeah, I could see that.
And then finally, I think denominations as a whole, we have massive, the SBC is made up of, who knows how many thousands and thousands of churches. I think that with the drift or whatever else you want to call it in different denominations, we see a lot of splits. We've seen it with the Presbyterians. Now you have PCA, PCUSA, EPC, or like tons of different denominations.
First United Methodist have split.
Yeah, you've seen the split with that, and you're starting to see a split among Southern Baptists. So I think going further, 10, 20 years down the road, we won't see these massive denominations. I think we'll see a lot more independent Bible churches. I think we'll see a lot more smaller groups of like Mid-South Baptists, or, something like that, that kind of break off and form their own groups.
You may not see large anything as far as like even conferences are getting smaller.
Yeah.
I think the Passion Conference is kind of going to run to its end. Together for the Gospel is not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
Gospel Coalition, I don't think is as healthy now as it was 5-10 years ago. So, I mean, this kind of big tent movement that was built in the last in the 2010s is really coming to an end.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's just a mark of our society where people are less unified, more divided, and that's working its way. But also having to endure this series of shibboleths that we've talked about has been the divider. Where are you going to go? Because if you think about how we answered on every question, at least the ones I gave, I wasn't around in with Pope Leo when you were talking,
right?
But if you go with my list, and you said, which way did you go on gay marriage? Okay, no. Which way did you go on pronouns? Not going to use them. Which way did you go on COVID, lockdowns, vaccine, mask, and guilt? More toward personal responsibility. Which way did you go on Black Lives Matter? Didn't endorse. Which way did you go on Roe v. Wade? Good, glad it happened.
Awesome.
Glad the overturn happened.
Right.
Which way did you go on Christmas Day? We had service.
Yeah.
So if you've answered the same way on all of those, you eventually look up and find out you're kind of similar, but you might be a similar group.
Right.
And it's like, these are my people. We think similarly. But what do I have in common with someone, to pull my list back out again,
right,
that said, yes, gay marriage, will use the trans pronouns, wanted to have lockdowns through 2023, was all about Black Lives Matter, and said Roe v. Wade overturn was a sad day for women, closed churches on Christmas Day. What do I have in common with that person?
Very, very little.
When you actually find it, like, that's a worldview that we've uncovered. You've uncovered an entire worldview, and I think it's like, I want to mourn the fact that we're so divided. I don't enjoy the fact that we're divided, but at the same time, like, what choice do we have on these issues? They're in our face. You have to make a call, and you have to make the most biblical decision at every junction that you have in life. And when you make those choices, you look up and find there are other people standing around who made those same choices, and those are your people. Those are the ones you go to war with and are in your church and are a part of the body. And I think, man, that these are the people that we can build the next generation of Christianity with. Yeah. So anyway, I only had one of what I think is going to be the next one, because this is the most, I think this is coming like the next year or two. I think you're going to have to figure out what your view on Christian nationalism is. Did you see that coming?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I guess I could have. But
I really think that's coming, and churches are going to have to figure this out, because I've just noticed a movement into two camps over the last few years, and the word that's, I think, going to define this camp most is Christian nationalism, and whether or not you go that direction, or if you go to what might be called pietism, Christian pietism, or even pluralism, to say, one camp might say it's our job as Christians to make America Christian. We want this nation to reflect in its laws, in its people, in its government, on every level. We want this nation to reflect Christ and to be a reflection of Him. And then you might have others that say that is absolutely not the job of Christians. We want to be focused on worship, personal holiness, sharing the gospel person to person, but not really concerned about having these sweeping, larger goals of seeing the dominion of Christ take over and be, all over the earth or all over the nations. So I think at some point, the way your view of what Christianity is supposed to do and accomplish is going to come to a head, because it's going to affect your methodology. And if the level at which you push back when secularism knocks on your door, if you're a little aligned with that Christian nationalism camp, you're going to say, no, not here, not in my country. This is not the way it works. God's told me to push back on idols, and I'm going to do it. And, kind of the other side is going to be like, oh, well, as long as it doesn't affect my personal practice, as long as I can practice Christianity privately and personally, or in my church, that's all that matters. Are you okay with America's government basically removing all references to God, removing all the laws reflecting sort of this new perspective of, where laws come from some worldview, right? So anyway, I think that's its own episode. I agree. At some point.
That's definitely going to be one coming up soon. If not already here. It's
here. So for me, I think that's the next big one is, do you think Christians have a role in changing the structure of the place in which they live and the culture? Are we supposed to fight the culture war, or are we supposed to back down and say, no, we just worry about our personal, our church, our, personal lives? So I think that's coming big time.
Definitely.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the Shibboleths. The title of this episode, A Multitude of Shibboleths. Aaron, say the word.
Shibboleth.
Oh, he said it.
My bad.
I'm glad you took the bait.
My bad.
You took the bait. I'm glad that you did. So we are split forever.
My Hebrew grammar is not where it should be.
I understand. But you have a great professor.
Yeah, he'll fix it.
Glad to have this podcast with you guys. Please leave us a rating and review or share it with a friend. And most importantly, join a Bible-believing church where the word is preached and God's worshiped in spirit and truth. If you're in the Memphis area, that is Kirby Woods Baptist Church. We'd love to see you at 10:30 a.m. God bless. Have a great week.